nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these programs, now being broadcast on television screens in 122 communities all over the length and breadth of the United States. It's a great privilege for me to have as my guest on this broadcast a man I've been privileged to know for decades, certainly all the way back to 1960, when we were both present in Sharon, Connecticut, at the founding meeting of Young Americans for Freedom. Stan Evans was already an accomplished leader in the conservative movement. He had been the editor of the Yale Daily News. At the age of 23, he became the editor of the Indianapolis News. He wrote the Sharon Statement, launching Young Americans for Freedom, a statement which sounds as good, reads as well, is as good as it was when he first wrote it. He's a man of tremendous achievement, has written many books, has trained many young people in the arts of journalism, and he is the author of a very important book. Now, most of us intuitively knew that Joe McCarthy was unfairly maligned by the left-wing soft-on-communism media, but we didn't always have the hard evidence to prove our case in the defense of Senator Joe McCarthy of Wisconsin. For all time now, McCarthy's case has been proven, and it's been proven in a wonderful book, and I bought several copies of this book to share with members of my family, called Blacklisted by History. And if you're an anti-communist conservative, you're going to love this book. And it's a tremendous accomplishment. Stan Evans has done many things in his life which are worthy of note and praise. But this is something for which he will be favorably remembered for many decades. Stan, how did you come to write this?
Well, first of all, Howie, thank you very much for having me on your show and for those very kind words. It's great to be here with you. I am of an age, as your viewers can tell by looking at me, to have remembered Joe McCarthy. I was in college when all of that stuff was going on back in the early 50s. And then over many decades, like yourself, I was engaged in writing and advocacy and analysis about the Cold War with the Soviet Union, which was the dominant issue of the 20th century in foreign policy, at least. And so I maintain an interest in these issues of communism, Soviet threat, communist penetration of our government, internal security questions, and so on, and accumulated a lot of materials, hearings, files over the years. And then the thing that triggered this book specifically was the so-called 50-year rule, which affects lots of records of the federal government, including Senate, the executive session committee hearings of the McCarthy subcommittee in the Senate. Also affected records of the FBI, records of other government agencies, and a lot of stuff which was not available back in the 50s and 60s and 70s is now available if you will take the trouble to look at it. And mostly I spent, I don't know how many hours at the FBI pulling files on McCarthy cases. And I have now about 100,000 pages of FBI files in my possession, and lots of stuff in the National Archives and otherwise. And so I took all that material and stuff I got from other people. I didn't do the work, but people like Herb Romerstein did. The files from the Soviet Union, the Venona papers, which are these secret messages that were communicated back and forth between Moscow and their agents over here. So I took this mass of material and ran the McCarthy cases against this material, and there they are. And so that's kind of the way the book came together.
How long did it take you to write it?
Well, a good question. The drafting of it probably took me about a year, but the backup research, which is really the hard part, took many years, probably a decade, and intensively about 6 years.
Did you have a hard time finding a publisher? Because this goes against political correctness and the conventional wisdom.
It certainly does. I did not have that much difficulty because I would have if I'd done it 10 years earlier. And I in fact, had talked to some publishers back in the 80s about doing such a book. There was no interest. But in the 90s and early 2000s, lots of conservative books sold lots of copies. And so a lot of publishers who before had not realized it came to understand that there was a market for conservative books. And most of this was done through Regnery. Al Regnery's company, he's no longer there, but it still bears his name. They sold a lot of books to conservatives and about topics of interest to conservatives. And mainstream publishing houses in New York paid attention to this, and they are now publishing more conservative books too. And my publisher for this book is Crown Forum, which is a subdivision of Random House. So that's how that works.
That's a pretty big publisher.
Yes.
And are you pleased with the way in which the book has been promoted? And how has it been promoted?
It has mostly been promoted by people like you and the alternative media. It has been promoted on talk radio, by the internet, the alternative methods, cable people, cable TV. That's the way.
Did Crown get it in bookstores?
Yes. Yes, they did a very good job. It's in Borders, Barnes & Noble. Anybody can get it, through the normal
What about
channels.
the big box stores like Costco and Walmart?
I do not know. Probably not.
I'm a regular at Costco, and I haven't
Really?
seen it there.
I could not vouch for that, but I would take your word that it's not
What
there.
proportion of the books are purchased online, Amazon or whatever, as
Quite
opposed
a
to
few through
bookstores?
Amazon. And one of the interesting things I found out, and as you can guess from my generation, I'm not much of a computer expert, to put it mildly, and I've been impressed by the way the system works now. It's very different from what I'm accustomed to. And that is that Amazon in particular is a feedback mechanism for media exposure. And for example, one of the people that has been very enthusiastic about the book is Ann Coulter. And anytime Ann Coulter would write about the book or talk about it in some place, immediately it would spike on Amazon. And the same is true of other media comments. And what happens is that people sit and watch or hear something, and they will go right to their computer and order the book then and there from Amazon. So Amazon is kind of a thermometer by which you can gauge the
Absolutely.
the way the book is moving.
I'm trying to find a publisher for a book on which I'm working. And I remember when I went to the publisher's agent, the first thing she did was check out where books of this kind stood on the Amazon list. And she said, sorry, it's too low.
Yeah.
This book won't sell.
Well, Amazon is an amazing phenomenon, and it's a paradox because people are saying that the internet and computers and whatnot are going to displace print media and so forth and books, but the biggest success story on the internet is selling books.
I buy at least one book
There
every
you
day.
go. So it kind of all works together. So, but anyways, it's done pretty well. The book is done pretty well.
Let's talk about what's in the book. You prove in the book that there was Soviet penetration of our government.
Big time.
And you also prove that Joe McCarthy was right
Correct.
in identifying
Correct.
people who were, to put it bluntly, Soviet agents.
That is correct. Just for the benefit of your audience, assuming there are some that may not know the background, the conventional story on Joe McCarthy was that he made all these wild charges against innocent people, smeared victims in the State Department in particular and elsewhere, calling them communists, and without a shred of proof to go on.
So they said.
So they said, and so it is still said in all of the history books and the biographies of McCarthy, endless number of iterations of these charges.
Whenever someone talks to me about McCarthyism, I always reply, well, Gene wasn't such a bad
There
guy.
you go.
Anyway, I interrupted.
I like that. I like that. And there are people who would think that you're being serious because they don't remember the other. But anyway, so that's the conventional story on Joe McCarthy. That's where McCarthyism comes from. And it's been out there for 50 years. And so what is now possible is to test that conventional image against the empirical record that is available now as it was not then. And I was very fortunate in about the year 2000, maybe 1999, to get the names of all the early McCarthy cases. And one of the problems in all the history books is that the cases were anonymous. When McCarthy went before the Senate, he only gave them by case number 1, case number 2, all from 1 to 80. He did not give any names. So the cases were anonymous. And unless you have the names, there's no way to check anything. In 1999 or 2000, I forget which it was, I got those names from Ralph de Toledano.
What a great man he was.
He was.
Ralph died in his 90s.
He did.
He was an expert on everything, jazz, communism,
right.
The Spanish Civil War, you name it, he did it.
Correct. And he knew a lot about Joe McCarthy. And what had happened was, back in 1954, Ralph and his then-wife, Nora Toledano, had an assignment from the Hearst newspapers to write a series about Joe McCarthy. And this was when the Army McCarthy hearings were going on, and then the censure of McCarthy, a very controversial period. And they went to McCarthy's office and got from him these boxes of files about all the cases. And Hearst, for some reason, Ralph told me that somebody at the Eisenhower White House got to Hearst and stopped this. The series was canceled. Ralph had actually drafted Nora drafted the articles. They never ran. And the whole McCarthy thing just fell apart. The first there were McCarthy hearings, and then immediately the censure, and it was all just a chaotic scene.
Stan, let's go into detail on these issues right after this break.
Got it.
Stay with us. We're talking about a book that you need to read called Blacklisted by History. We have on this set with me today the author of this historic work, M. Stanton Evans, Blacklisted by History. We'll be right back following these messages.
Hi, I'm Congressman Tom Tancredo. You know, I just returned from a hearing on the southern border in a place called Brownsville, Texas. One of the participants in the hearing told us that for them, a border really doesn't exist between the United States and Mexico. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people have that attitude, that there are no such things as borders, that they really don't matter, that they're just lines on a map and nobody should pay attention to them, and that we're all just residents of the North American continent. Well, you know what? That's baloney. It's baloney, but only if you will do something about it to prove to the people of this country, and especially to your elected officials, that you know borders matter, that you know the sovereignty of this country is at risk, and that you will take action to make sure that they understand it. That action is best taken by calling your local talk radio stations, writing letters to the editor, and of course, letting members of Congress know that you know. That's the best thing. They're hoping, as a matter of fact, that no one really picks up on this issue of a North American trade association that essentially eliminates borders. But the fact is it's happening. You can see parts of it all of the time. So it's something that we need to stop. America, and I mean the United States of America, not the continent, but the United States of America is at stake. Do your part.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus, and our guest is M. Stanton Evans, author of Blacklisted by History. And Stan, you were before the break telling us about a very providential meeting with Ralph de Toledano.
Right. What I was aiming at was just the fact that Ralph had in his possession, because of his work on this series of articles about Joe McCarthy, a lot of McCarthy's files. When McCarthy got censured and the whole thing fell apart, those files were never returned to McCarthy. Ralph kept them. He had them for 40 years. And when I had dinner with him, I was going to look at them, and we didn't get around to it. And he said, why don't you just take them? So I have them. I have them now. And
when you go, who will have them?
I have told the manuscript division of the Library of Congress that I would like to bestow these papers to them.
Do you trust them?
I trust John Haynes, who is the curator of...
so they will not destroy them?
Correct. Yeah. Well, I've got enough photographic copies of them made that even if somebody did destroy them, we've got the copies. But the point is, I got the names of the McCarthy anonymous cases. And as we were talking about on the break, this is the Rosetta Stone. This is the key to everything else. With the names, you can track through all the other records to find the cases. Without the names, you can't track anything. And I was able to track, with the now available information, these McCarthy cases in the FBI files, and State Department records and so forth, and over and again, there they are. So that's what the book is about.
That's great. What impact did Soviet penetration of our government have? How did it affect policy?
Huge. You've asked characteristically of you have asked the key question. That is the most important question. It affected policy in crucial episodes over and over again. One of the earliest examples, which I write about briefly in the book, was Pearl Harbor. And in the latter 30s and up into 1941, the Japanese military leaders were on a knife edge as to which way to go in getting involved in the wider war that was already going on in Europe. And one faction wanted to go north and attack Russia. That, for historic reasons, it was always a huge antagonism.
The 1905 Russo-Japanese War.
Correct. And it was much worse by the 1930s. And another faction wanted to go south to get oil and other resources in the Netherlands, Indies, and from British possessions and our possessions, or our protectorates, Philippines, and so on. And so this was all up for grabs. And in the Soviet Union, in Tokyo, there was Soviet agent Richard Sorga, who was probably the Soviets' most effective secret agent ever, who was pushing to make sure they did not attack Russia, that they attacked us. The same line was being pursued here in Washington by Harry Dexter White, who was a Soviet agent in the Treasury Department, and Lachlan Curry, who was a Soviet agent in the White House. And both of them were pushing to make sure there wasn't any modus vivendi between America and Japan, so that the Japanese would not feel free to attack Russia. And in Chongqing, China, was Owen Lattimore, sent there by us as an advisor to Chiang Kai-shek, who sent back a memo saying if we made any kind of modus vivendi with Japan, it would be outrageous to Chiang Kai-shek. And so we couldn't betray Chiang Kai-shek like that. And so Owen Lattimore was later identified.
Found other ways to betray him.
Yes, he did, and later turned bitterly against Chiang Kai-shek. And Owen Lattimore was identified by the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee as a conscious, articulate instrument of the Soviet conspiracy. So you had Lattimore in Chongqing, Sorga and his Soviet agent friends in Tokyo, and White and Curry right here in Washington. They had all the bases covered. And all of them were pushing to make sure that Japan did not attack Russia and instead would attack us, and the result was Pearl Harbor.
To what degree was FDR cognizant of these things?
I don't think he had any clue.
Was Eleanor cognizant?
I don't think so. I don't know. I cannot categorically say, but that is just one example. There are many other examples of these people using their influence at very high levels. Curry was very instrumental in later helping turn our policy against Chiang Kai-shek in China. Solomon Adler in the Treasury Department was in China He was a Soviet agent.
How did Alger Hiss rise to so significant a position of influence? He was in the agriculture department?
He was. That was the first major cell was in the agriculture department, which was not an accident because at that time that was a huge domestic issue, the farm thing, and there were a whole bunch of people in the agriculture department who wanted to emulate the collective farming of the Soviets. There was a guy named Harold Ware, who was the head of the cell, who had been in the Soviet Union, was a big fan of Soviet collective farming. Hiss was part of that group. Lee Pressman, Nathan Witt, others who were later identified as being communists were there. Also, they then dispersed into different agencies, into the National Labor Relations Board. That was quite an enclave of them. Some into the State Department. Hiss went to the Nye Committee on Capitol Hill, then went to State Department, and others went to different agencies at the same time, and the result was that they had people spread out all over the government.
And Hiss wound up writing the Charter of the UN.
He was the acting Secretary General of the Founding Conference. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And little personal footnote, after I graduated from college, my first job was with Congressman Lawrence Curtis of Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. He had been a law clerk to Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, along with a fellow by the name of Alger Hiss. Mm-hmm. Small world.
Well, there was a conveyor belt that ran through from Harvard Law through Frankfurt, Felix Frankfurter, to the Supreme Court. And Frankfurter's own clerks and Holmes's clerks, all these people were fed down here into Washington through the Frankfurter connection. Felix Frankfurter was responsible for that.
Was Truman aware of any of these things?
He was absolutely clueless. What happened was, and I've got some of the stuff in the book, I don't know if I can get a close-up of this, the FBI got onto these people pretty early. And early as 1942, for example, they knew that J. Robert Oppenheimer, the alleged...
Did your dad know that? Your dad worked...
he knew it later.
Yeah, your dad worked on the Manhattan
Atomic
Project.
Energy Commission, yeah.
And the AEC, and Oppenheimer played a key role in the development of our nuclear power.
Correct. And my dad got on the trail of Oppenheimer, but later. The Bureau knew about him in December 1942, where they had wiretapped communist leaders talking to each other, discussing Oppenheimer as a secret member of the Communist Party. And I reproduce in the book, well, this can't, but I reproduced the FBI report in the book where that is talked about. However, there were still other episodes that maybe it will make a better graphic. 30 seconds, it says, so we're not going to get this done until that happens. But maybe when we come back...
Yeah, we're going to take a break, Stan. This is incredible stuff. I hope every student of American history has a chance to view this broadcast or to obtain a DVD of this. We produce DVDs of all of our interviews. Some of them have been viewed by many thousands of people. And I think this is a DVD that if you're a viewer, you ought to obtain and share with your family so they can learn the real history of communist penetration of the U.S. government. Stay with us. I'll be right back with M.Stanton Evans following these messages. One of the major activities of the Conservative Caucus is Constitution education. We want to help raise up a new generation of leaders who understand the underlying principles of the Constitution and the meaning of its key provisions. Through programs such as Conservative Roundtable, through mailings, workshops, conferences, seminars, we strive to communicate the legacy of the Founding Fathers. Each year we commemorate Constitution Day, September 17th. We publish newsletters, action bulletins, and other materials to promote an understanding of and fidelity to the Constitution, and we work with members of Congress who share our vision and share our concern. We hope you will decide to work with us as well by becoming a supporter of the Conservative Caucus.
www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable. I hope you will check out the website of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts, www.conservativeusa.org. If you want more information about what the Conservative Caucus does, and if you wish to become involved, please drop us a note at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. Fax us your name and address, 703-281-4108. Now, we've been very privileged to have Stanton Evans, the author of this great book, Blacklisted by History. He's working on another book about the consequences of treason, that's what it was, by people like Alger Hiss. Stan, we have about a minute and a half left. Tell us what we need to know.
Well, I guess the one thing that maybe I should focus on a little bit very quickly is that what had happened was, just an overview, the penetration of the government by communist and Soviet agents and fellow travelers was massive, particularly during World War II. Nothing much was done about it. It was allowed to happen, and then the government at the time, the Roosevelt administration, Truman administration, did virtually nothing to clean these people out, and they kind of covered it all up. And there's a lot in my book about the cover-up. So that, A, they let it happen, and B, they covered it up. In 1950, out of nowhere, comes Joe McCarthy, this unknown senator.
What motivated him?
I think he just found out about this stuff.
He was a patriot.
He was an ex-Marine. He was a patriotic American, and he found a lot of these files on these cases, and he blew the lid off the cover-up. That's what, in essence, happened. That then made him public enemy number one with the people who'd been covering it up, and they set out to destroy him. And as early as the spring of 1950, they were saying he must be censured, expelled from the Senate, and 4 years later they finally got it done.
And if you trace it back, it goes all the way to Joe Stalin, who wanted to prevent anti-communism from prevailing in the U.S. On the screen is information about how you can contact M. Stanton Evans, and the best thing you can do is read this book. We'll see you in the next edition of Conservative Roundtable.